So it is now time, after those insights from Raphael, from Aideen, from Joanne and from Paul, for us to move to our panel discussion. And we've got a fantastic representation of senior management from both the ship owning but also the cargo owning side of the industry. So I would love to introduce you to Ingrid Uppelschotten Snelderwaard, who is the COO of Svitzer, Jan Dieleman, who is the president of Cargill Ocean Transportation, Mark Cameron, who's the COO at Ardmore, and Sue Yin Anand, who is the head of shipping at South 32. So welcome to all. We're just getting a bit of time for everyone to get on virtually. There we are. Great to see you all. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, so I think one of the things that we'd like to look at first, before we talk to you about your own experiences in terms of the senior management and the business case for you in that area, is just to look at the annual review that you heard that Jenny presented today. What stood out most for you in that presentation that Jenny gave? And were there any surprises? Were there any particular disappointments from what you heard? In terms of starting off, Jan, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for having me, Heidi. It's great to be in this forum. So when I looked at the numbers, there were unfortunately a lot of things which weren't a surprise, because we've been looking at numbers quite a bit. A couple of things did stand out, though. I think the number of people in leadership roles, or the C-suite, I think you called it, the females, was higher than I expected. So I think that was a positive. Having said that, if I combine that with the, I think you call it the desk kind of head kind of roles, and you combine it, the number actually looks very similar to what we have, which is females in senior positions in the low 20%, which is clearly not enough. The one big disappointment I have to say is 100% score. I think that is worrying, right? 100% non-white, 100% white, sorry. So basically 0 non-white declaration. I think that was a surprise to me in a way. If you really think through it and you see who you get across in events around the world, it also isn't a surprise to some extent. So those were two of the main things that stood out from the numbers, and it's always great to be reminded.
Absolutely, and of course it's a representation of those who've taken part, so we're hoping, of course, as the data grows, that we'll get more representation. But yeah, I think there's some very good insights there. Ingrid, what about you? As COO of Svitzer, anything standing out there for you?
Yeah, thanks, Heidi, and lovely to be here today. Yeah, Jan has actually taken the two most the biggest topics that I also took out, but I think one that I would like to add is that over half did not have a D&I training from actually the pool of people that you got the feedback on. I think that is a high number, because training and creating awareness is one of the first building blocks to actually start having the conversations at all levels around D&I. And I think that that number did stood out for me. So I think there's also maybe an opportunity for, with your support, Heidi, to share what does good training look like, right? What is it that what do we have in Svitzer? What do we have in Cargill, for example? I'm sure we don't need to all reinvent the wheel around that to actually start moving on this. But I think training is one of the critical elements to start creating awareness and putting D&I on the agenda across the company.
Absolutely, and I think that was interesting because I'm going to come to Mark next, as CEO of Ardmore. Mark, it was something that Aideen mentioned, wasn't it? Was that training, awareness, the education building within Ardmore has been an absolute fundamental part of what you've done, and you've seen the results coming through. But over to you in terms of what you took away from that presentation from Jen.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the obvious things have already been said, so let me broaden my answer out a little bit more. First of all, I thought it was really fascinating and very valuable, and the value is in the data and the analysis, no longer in the thoughts and perceptions. Two words that stood out for me were transparency and trust, and I think they're symbiotic words. You can't have one without the other, and in reverse. So you can't have trust without transparency. So I thought that was great. I heard the language of collaboration, and in everything that we do, we're realizing that collaboration and innovation go hand in hand. You can't innovate by yourself. you have to reach out and listen to what other people are doing. So I thought that was really, really good. I was particularly surprised though at 82% in the IT sector. I thought that's strange. I can't understand a reason why IT would be so heavily male dominated. There must be many, many more opportunities in that area. So I think that was certainly something that I'd like to understand a little bit more. And then the last point, I think, if you think about what we're all trying to do and what on a panel like this we're representing, we're not just representing our companies, we're representing an industry. And this is an industry that's trying to change as a whole. And it's great, again, to come back to that collaboration thing where what we're doing as individuals will pay dividends across an entire business platform. And I think that's changing the world, and that's important.
Thank you. And Suyin, delighted to have you as Head of Shipping South 32 join us as well. And I saw you nodding your head. I think we all were in the various comments that you're making. What were your takeaways?
Well, thanks, Heidi. Good morning, Heidi, and thanks for having me on this panel. A lot of my thoughts have already been expressed, but again, a bit like Mark, maybe I can expand on it a bit. I think in relation to the data that showed 27% of female in C-suite positions, I was pleasantly surprised. But I also look at it as a testament to the success of companies which have implemented D&I programs. And I think this is something that we should be showcasing more and pushing out more to show that DEI programs actually work. A comment which again surprised me was the comment, well, surprised me to some extent, but again, not surprising, was the lack of women in senior positions. Because when we correlate that back to the data, there are women in senior positions, right? We've got about 27%, not a lot, but there are women in senior positions, and we've got about 19% as departmental heads. So why is it still a sense that there is a lack of women in senior positions? And I'm being very specific on words, lack, because there's no lack. So one thing that crossed my mind was, are female leaders leaning in enough? Are female leaders coming out enough as role models to show that, wait a minute, there is no lack of female leaders in the maritime industry. There are female leaders. We are the female leaders, and let us show you what you can do to get to our position. So I think it's something around the females leaning in within the maritime industry and acting as role models. The last point I have was not so much on the data, but something which Jenny brought out in her introduction, as she was reminding us of the definitions. Can't get away from being a lawyer from my former background, but she highlighted equity. And I think that's something that's been missing in the conversation today. There's been a lot of focus on diversity and inclusion, both really important. But I think in order to bring it all home, equity is actually what underpins a successful programs and the access to equal opportunities for all who are involved in the, who are targets of any diversity, equity, and inclusion program. So I thought that was a really good reminder by Jenny.
Thank you. No, and I think so as well. And I think when I look back to when this conversation first started about the DSG, and Mark was and Ardmore, one of the first organisations we spoke to, the conversation then was pretty much in the industry was pretty much around gender and gender only. So I think the fact that a number of years on and 3 years on, we've said this is a long journey, make no mistake it is, but the fact that we're already now looking at the equity and that we're creating those opportunities, absolutely we should be, but a really key point, and one that I also know that within your organisations you're looking at trying to do as well. Not that I'm suggesting it's an easy one to achieve, but definitely one we need to have up there. We've spoken there about the fact that the data showed 27% of C-suite positions were held by women, and of course I'm mindful of the fact that the data from this survey comes from employees of members committed to D&I. So do we think this would be the norm if we took it out to the broader maritime industry and non-participants in this initiative? Would it be the norm, or is it an aspirational figure demonstrating what can be achieved? And Ingrid, I'll come to you first, because obviously I know that within your senior management team, you've got a very strong gender balance, haven't you?
Yes, we do. Within Svitzer, our leadership team is gender balanced, but I need to add to it that we are all European. Mm-hmm. So in we are hitting some of the targets that we have, but we're not hitting them all. So there is constant work to do. Looking at the data that you shared earlier in the technical side, which is part of my responsibility, there it's very male dominant. So it's less than 20% women. So yes, if you start at the top in Svitzer, it might be actually painting a little bit of a better picture. If you go 1 or 2 levels down, you start to see that we still have the challenges, as you has also outlined in the survey. I think what we need to encourage, because the 27%, you said it yourself, Heidi, it's part of a population that is focusing on D&I and hence also takes the time and creates the inputs to the survey. So I think they might be ahead of the curve. They could be ahead of the journey. For those who are not that far and potentially also not part of this forum, it's an encouragement, right? Because you can see that if you put your efforts to it, then you can actually make progress. So within the population potentially that has replied to your survey, it is maybe the norm, but maybe outside of that, it's not. And I think what we need to encourage is that that the women that are taking up the C-suite, that they become more visible, because it is all about role modeling. It's the comment I get most, that other women say, oh, I can see it's possible. You can do it. You can actually get there. And you don't always need to make difficult choices at certain points in your career. So I think there's an element here for all of us to actually showcase, role model, and speak about why is it working, and also put the women in front of the conversation. Or if we're talking about ethnicity, equity, etc., then to make sure that we actually role model it well and put the showcases forward.
Yeah, completely agree, and very, very well put, and tying in with what Soo-Yin was saying as well there, of course.
Yeah.
Mark, anything to add to that?
Yeah, mathematically, if you had 5 C-suite, CEO, CFO, CCO, maybe COO, let's hope that the representation of 27% isn't just reserved for the CHRO title, because I think, that would be a pity in itself. And that's not what we're trying to achieve. It's not a single title that we're looking to fill just to get some quota. And I think, again, language is important, right? So a quota is completely the wrong way to look at it and think about it, because that automatically breeds resistance in an organization. Targets is important. And, I think targets are aspirational, and targets are common language that we all have in our business. And there's no shame in putting a target out there for visibility and transparency. But let's make sure that it's not just single title HR positions that are being singled out as the go-to filling of a target. We should be looking for 50% of the C-suite, not just single areas.
It's one we're certainly going to be tracking very closely. Don't you worry, Mark. And I think also, and I completely agree with you on the CHRO title, Chief Human Resource Officer, but there's still a lot of organisations where I'm not convinced that those even exist at that level. Even if some of them are creeping in there, that's a good start, but we definitely have a lot more work to do. And we saw at the other end of the scale, looking at the junior level, 63% women compared to 35% men. Soo-Yin, why do you think that is? Are we doing more work? Is it an anomaly? What do you think?
No, I think that number. Oh, was it Soo-Yin or me? Because
that one was Soo-Yin, and then I'm going to come to you after, if that's all right.
Sorry, yeah. I'll try to keep it short. I can see you're raring to go to share your. I find it fascinating, and I'll be honest, I went to Google immediately to say, break me down demographics, gender demographics between 18 to 25 years old, just to see what the gender balance between male and females in that age group was. Reality was they're not too far off, you're about 50%. So this stat was interesting. I think for me, we do need to unpick what disciplines of study these juniors and trainees opted to enroll in college or in technical school. And also, I question whether, there is a bit of the boys choosing disciplines like engineering or finance in order to get to what has been, viewed as the sexier industries of tech and finance. Mark mentioned a point earlier, just as on the bylines about, why is it 82% in tech? Tech is having a similar, if not worse, problem than we do when it comes to gender diversity, because tech is very heavily male dominated, and they are grappling with the same questions we are about how to attract women into their industry. So I think if we extrapolate that to some extent to the data that we're seeing in terms of the juniors coming into the shipping industry, it could mean that women are studying more disciplines like law, because I know in law school you're seeing about 2/3, 1/3 in favor of females. They could be studying business, which then sees them apply for jobs within shipping. But I also think, let's not take credit away from the companies that have been pushing the D&I agenda in universities to make it a more attractive discipline for females. So that's my general view.
Thank you. Jan, it's definitely your turn now.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry
Over
for
to
that. No, I think Sujin, I think you nailed some of them clearly on the head. I think it is somehow also easier at the junior level to hire more diverse. If you look at universities, I think it's indeed something like 50-50. So that already is making it a bit easier. You don't have the burden sometimes or the bias that I think exists in companies around the experience, because if you're hiring straight junior people, the experience thing is less important, and you're hiring by definition much more for potential. So I think that is the other thing that helps there. But I think there's another angle to this, and I just looking at ourselves, and we know that we have a problem with females in this particular example falling out of the workforce over time of their career. So if as a company you're not going to hire more than 50% females on the entrance door, you're never going to get to gender parity somehow. So I think there is also a big push from people, and also very much ourselves, to actually try to get actually even more females in than 50-50, because you know that you might be losing some on the way. So I think some of it is deliberate choices from people really taking this serious. And I think part of it is the level in the organization. It is a little bit easier to get them in. Yeah.
No, good points. Thank you. And I've got one more question related to the annual review before we sort of like take the discussion a little bit broader. And one of the other things that struck us was the figure that 67% of respondents felt they could raise discrimination concerns internally, but it dropped off. So it dropped off to 63% for women, 57% for those from Asian backgrounds, and 52% for those from Hispanic and Latinos. So as leaders in the industry, what more can organisations do to make it feel safe for people to speak up, but especially those who are from the underrepresented groups in organisations? Mark, can we come to you first on that one?
Yeah, and I thought about this, and I'm struck by reading, kind of in the mainstream media, what's going on the C side of the business. And I think, let's be broad when we're looking at this. And if you look what's going on in the US at the moment, I'm sort of sitting looking at this and feeling a little ashamed that within the and certainly this is a US spotlight that's been put on. There are problems out there in the industry, and as far as we think we've come, when you see some of the surface being stretched in this, you realize that we've got a long way to go. So if that's happening out there on the ships, and somebody was referring to it earlier, when that's transported ashore, depends what's acceptable, or kind of what's we've got the poster on the wall versus what's the reality on the ground. So I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say that if that is happening out there, we've got to do more about that on the ships, and we've got to transport that thinking into our land-based operations, because what we're doing right now isn't enough. I think in terms of things that are working well to try and overcome it, it was mentioned, Paul and Joanne mentioned earlier about mentoring, and certainly I'm a great believer in that. And Paul and I worked together years ago back in TK, and I know that was something that we were very strong on in that environment. So it is a small world, and we do. It is important that we continue to build those bridges and keep connected with each other. Face-to-face time is very important. There's Teams has been good, and it's been great in many respects, but getting out there and getting into regional offices and understand what's going on It is a global industry, so thinking that what you've got in one part of your world, perhaps where there's head office, and what happens in a regional, smaller office can be very different, both in terms of culture and in terms of tolerance or attitude. So you've got to make sure that there's consistency there. Important that people want to see fairness. Above all, people want to know that when a problem is raised, that it's dealt with fairly. And I think, you know, I had a question previously with you, Heidi, around the Me Too campaign. If you're going to have a platform like that, you want to make sure that there is fairness, and you can't just put a voice into one camp and say, well, that's the dominant camp of correctness. There has to be a just process that can be followed, that people can believe in. And I think that you have to understand that when you do organizational surveys, the perceptions that come across is the reality that you've got to deal with. And you have to be doing that level of temperature and sensory check within an organization, coming back to the point about data. Hopefully that answers.
Thank you. No, absolutely. And some really, really good points there. Su-Yin, what about from your perspective?
So I think Mark has touched on some really, really good points, and I agree with them, particularly on transparency, fairness, and support through a mentoring system. I think the one thing I would say is when it comes to policies like diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really important to think global, but to go local. Because the reasons why people may not be speaking up could vary according to locations. So it's important to understand the why and the barriers that are preventing people from speaking up. A lot of times, coming from an Asian background, I can say this, Asians don't feel comfortable speaking up or challenging authority, you know, similar to what goes on the ship, right? Challenging the hierarchy. So organizations then need to think, all right, so if that is the friction, what can I put in place to make it easier for people to speak their minds? And a lot of times I think it starts from the lower level when you're just having an individual team meeting. Are managers trained to invite everyone around the table to air their views? Or if someone is not comfortable speaking up, is there an alternative way for them to share their opinions? And it's through, you know, for example, just a feedback box, you know, write in, drop in a feedback box and we'll respond to you. So it's changing the mindset gradually for cultures which are not comfortable or which speaking up don't come naturally, and slowly building up that trust in the system, that there's no repercussion that comes from speaking up. So it'll take time, but we need to be creative about how to create a safe environment for people to speak up.
Absolutely. I think it's looking at it from all angles, and you know, we've spoken about the different perspectives, and it is very much for everyone to understand, along with those different perspectives, that all individuals and culture plays a part, gender plays a part, educational background, or the whole things. We all have our own challenges that we need to overcome in certain situations, and it's how to help people overcome those challenges. So very much agree with that. Ingrid, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I want to build on further on it and share an example of, I'm sure many of us are having a whistleblower hotline in our companies. And what we found out during one of the surveys that we had internally in the group was that people don't trust the whistleblower because they don't know what is happening after you have submitted a concern or a complaint, or how anonymous is it? People didn't understand who is actually reading what I have put in, what is the process behind it. So yes, you can have the tools in place, but you really need to ask yourself, how are they being used and how are they being perceived? Does it create that level of trust that is necessary to actually have people speaking up? And Su-Yin is absolutely right. Some people from cultural backgrounds, they don't like to challenge authority. So is then a whistleblower could be a tool, but if then still being perceived, I don't know where my complaint or concern is going to, then it's actually not helping at all. It's not existing to create this level of transparency and actually take necessary actions as needed. So I think there is an element of providing the tools, but there's also very much an element, how do you make sure that people have that confidence level in it, and how do you create the awareness on how to use it best? What we could see from an ombudsman function, that had a face to it, right? 2 dedicated people in the group, that already created a lot better, basically, adoption to it, because the people are known for their credibility. The people are known for the high level of confidence and trust. So you have different tools in the toolkit, but you really need to articulate well how are they used and what is the process behind it.
Thank you. And yeah, a really valid point. And I think the other thing that occurred to me while you were saying that as well is surely it also can tie into the mentoring side of things as well. Because if you have strong mentors and you have strong allies, you may not feel comfortable in certain situations. And just thinking back to, you know, my own career, is there are times when I could really have used someone, and sometimes still good, to go and have a chat to, and, you know, just a sounding board. So is this normal? How do I deal with this? I'm not, you know, I don't want to make a big deal out of it, or sometimes you might want to, but having that community, I think, which I think we're getting to, I'm not convinced we're there yet, but I think some of that would be beneficial. Yeah. Anything else from your perspective?
I think a lot was said already. I do think in the end of the day, a lot boils down to leadership in this, and how do you show up as leadership around these topics? And it's not just putting a policy in place that is going to make it work. So you need to have the dialogue with the people from different cultures, backgrounds, ages, maybe even, and just make this something you can talk about, right? And when I see the number, then it basically means that there's still not really an environment of safe environment created where people can actually speak up. And I think I would just encourage everyone to have those conversations with people and really listen, right? And I think that is going to be key in this, and walk the talk in the end of the day, right? And because people will look at leadership on how you deal with those issues. And if you're not willing to follow through, then I think the trust will go down, and you get to do the spiral that it's probably better to not speak up. And I think that is an environment that you don't want to create in your business.
No, absolutely. And I think it's making our working cultures those open places where we can talk. It's making them the norm, isn't it? And I don't think we're at the point yet where perhaps they are the norm for us in our sector. So we were going to broaden out the discussion a little bit, and I couldn't let you all be here as leaders in the industry without finding out a little bit about the driving factors for you, for your objectives in terms of improving D&I. So I guess there's three questions in one here, what's the main driving factor for you behind those objectives? What are the main challenges that you each face? And what are some of the steps being taken to overcome them? So yeah, going to come to you first on that one, please.
Right, thanks, Heidi. Well, that's a big question. If I wanted to distill the driving factor into one sentence, for me, it's just the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do if you want to build an industry that is relevant to the future generations in order to attract talent. So from a business perspective, I'll keep repeating it. It is the right thing to do. The why is unquestionable. From a very personal perspective, I've benefited from working in organizations, international organizations with a very diverse workforce and open culture. And as a result, I've been able to move through my career, eventually getting to where I am now. So for me personally, a lot of it has to do with paying it forward and also paving the way for the next generation of females, transgenders, you know, the minority or underrepresented groups, to understand that it is an industry where they can carve out something for themselves, and they do have the support to do it. Challenges. I think organizationally, there are many topics that suddenly become flavor of the month, that resources, both human resources as well as financial resources, get diverted to. And so one of the main challenges, how do you ensure that your corporation keeps focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that it attention doesn't get taken away from it by other topics that can, you know, like decarbonization, that can become flavor of the month. How am I dealing with it? I think it's talking about it. It's having a very honest conversation at the management level about why we need to continue focusing on DE&I, and how DE&I is actually relevant to these other current topics like innovation, decarbonization, sustainability, and even governance, right? That it all links in together. They're not mutually exclusive. And if we get a more diverse workforce in, the workforce ought to automatically be higher performing as well as more innovative. So let's look at it as a whole. and embed diversity into our business as usual instead of a standalone topic. So that's how I'm trying to approach it.
Thank you very much. Ingrid.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Su Yin was saying. It's the right thing to do, but if I can add another perspective to it, I think it also, diversity in a team also creates opportunities to be your 100% your authentic self. If everybody is the same or more or less the same in the team, then there is a much higher likelihood that you start to mirror that as well. If people are different, or people come from different cultures, different backgrounds, gender diversity, you automatically fit in by being yourself. And I think that is creating such a positive environment where you can really be innovative. The others spoke about that as well. You can be creative. Your ideas don't fall flat on their face because others might never have experienced it or might never have looked through that specific lens. So I think it is not only the right thing to do, it also makes the job much more interesting and working in a team more interesting, but it also allows you to develop yourself best way possible, because there is something in the authenticity that we every day need to bring forward to drive the best results forward. So,
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Jan, what about?
Yeah, no, I think a lot has been talked about the business opportunity, and I strongly believe that the transformation that the industry is going through or will have to go through, you're not going to do that with the talent that has been in the industry for the last 100 years. So I think the diversity piece there is just absolutely key to come out as a winner. So I think that is a big driver for me as well. I do think as well, what you see from a lot of stakeholders, this is becoming a bit the license to operate. And we talked about that in the GMF forum, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. I think that's the expectation. I think talent is not going to join your organization if you don't have this somehow nailed. I don't think you're going to be easily getting away from suppliers and customers if you don't have this, because you are going to get the question. So I think there's the carrot and the stick somehow here as well. So I much rather focus on the carrot than the stick. But the reality is that the expectation is going to move up. In terms of things which are sometimes difficult, and I agree what Su Yin said, that this is a topic that has the tendency to fade in and out and compete with all kind of other priorities, and I think that is fair. I do think one of the biggest things I see is people get it, but sometimes people are still struggling with their own unconscious biases around the topic. And it's very easy to fall into old patterns of hiring, old patterns of doing things, especially when there's a lot of short-term pressure to results, right? And I think that is something that we just need to acknowledge and constantly need to challenge around. And I think for me, what is really important here, and that's exactly, I think, what you're doing, Heidi, is you need to put numbers and you need to put an objective kind of mirror in front of people, because I think it reminds us that the urgency is there because we're far away from where we need to go, but also things like skill sets, right? And I think Raphael was referring to it earlier on. At the point that we were able to say, we have 1,300 years of seafaring experience in our operations department, it was very easy for everybody to agree that the next hire probably shouldn't have to be someone with seafaring experience. So if you can quantify these things and you can really put the mirror in front of people, I think it's a lot easier to somehow get away from these biases that we all have. And I think that is something that we don't talk a lot about, but I can see still something that even myself sometimes feel that I'm trapping in. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Mark, what about for you?
Yeah, I love what Su Yin said earlier about, kind of paying forward, because I'm sort of 37 years in the industry this year, so I'm kind of paying back. And I think it's that combination of paying forward and paying back that will make this a success. But fundamentally, we pay people to think. We're not an industry that's a production line. We don't pay people just to stand on a line and do repetitive processes. We truly pay people to think, and with thinking, we need ideas. And the only way that we're going to get ideas to come out is when you create an environment where people can find their voice. And I find that, even within myself, we have to practice this and do this quite a bit, because sometimes in those sort of collaborative environments where you're trying to sort of, bring ideas forward, then there can be a dominant voice that can talk over others. And we have to find the way to go, no, the practice needs to be that everybody gets the opportunity, and sitting back and listening is a skill that many of us still have to learn. and we might be listening, but we're not always hearing. And I think, so there's some of those very basic things that senior management need to really practice, because it doesn't always come naturally. One of the really important things for us is that when you come into these rooms, you leave your title and you leave your role at the door. And I head the energy transition team in Ardmore as one of my functions. And that's a group of 9 of us, 5 women and 4 men. And within the energy transition team, I've been amazed at some of the people who've picked up some reading things around, sustainable aviation fuel and gone away and read it. People that at different levels in the organization or with different job titles wouldn't necessarily think that, that's an area that they could be involved in or look at. But the energy transition transcends all 3 aspects of ESG in this way. And I'm trying to use that as an example to show that, on the S side, by creating an environment where someone further down in the organization can look at the energy transition and say, well, what do I need to learn about this? What can I learn? It's new for all of us. I can contribute to this by doing a little bit of research and work and coming away back and telling people about it. By looking at sustainable aviation fuel, I'm not sure any of us are really experts in this area. So anybody can go away and read up on it and come back and tell me about it and say, I think we should be looking at this. And it's the same with carbon trading. So all of these E factors that are out there really need the S factor to come to the fore so that we can get that range of understanding and thought and bottom-up kind of approach about what is really ESG is there for. One of the other things that I would like to say, though, is we have to be practical in applying budgets to everything that we do. And I think the E side, of course, has a big budgetary element attached to it, and that's a cost factor. But the S side can be a kind of revenue generator, really, because you can enable much better bottom line revenue. And I think Heidi was referring to this, because the business case around the S factor is so much more tangible. And that's certainly something that we see.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the other things I'm seeing from certain organisations as well is a commitment to resources, which we've sort of touched on before as well. And I think without that commitment to the resourcing side for this as well internally, it's a struggle, because also quite often when we're looking at this and from a leadership perspective, we know we need you behind it, we need you pushing the agenda and driving accountability. But if you're not committing the resources, and that's also time as much as anything else. So with I think with the Cargill example, it was a fascinating one of, well, actually, you've created time to look at the problem and time to try and address the solution, but also time to bring new talent in and to get that talent absorbed within your organization. And again, that's not something historically we've seen that much of in this industry. We tend to be very reactive rather than proactive. So I also think if we can find a way, and I'd love a magic wand on this one, but find a way to support those within your organizations in creating that time to think, and to think about how we can do it differently, or if we apply a DE&I lens to what we're trying to achieve from a business perspective, what can that change about the people we're trying to bring on board and the roles that they occupy? Is something else that can help move it, and move the needle, as we say. I think we've touched on this already, but for those leaders who've not yet incorporated D&I as part of their business and risk management strategy, how can it be incorporated into that ever-growing ESG agenda? And Jan, can we come to you first on that one, please?
Yeah, for me, it's very simple, and I think you touched on it earlier. This is a key enabler, I think, for many people's strategy, and I think that's the way you have to look at it. This is an enabler, and this is not something that is just run by an HR department. I think this should be an integral part of the business, and I think that is what really needs to happen to really bring this forward, I think. And I think that is where the most success lies. And if you're just going to put it there and you make it a kind of a compliance kind of topic, then I think you're not going to get very far. So I think what you really need to do is make it part of your business and showcase what was said earlier, that diverse teams are more creative, that diverse teams are having better performances. And I think we're seeing that more and more. So I think the case for change is there, but we really need to make sure that it's owned by the business, it's owned by the leadership, but also somehow executed by the people below in the organization, because I think that's also something that is sometimes missing.
Absolutely. And leading on from what you're saying as well, if you have an engaged team coming into work and they're enjoying it, they're going to be more productive naturally. And if they're more productive and more engaged, they're also going to want to do more for you, and also probably stay longer than head off to one of your competitors. So I think there's so much attached to it. Mark, from your side, anything else to add? You gave such a strong answer before.
I think, yeah, I agree with Jan there. And, data tells a story. You've got to let the data tell the story. And then it's what you do with the data next, right? So don't just make this a once-a-year event that you open up the book and go, oh, okay, we've got to look at this again. That's got to be there at every quarterly board meeting. It's got to be there at every management meeting. And you've got to be doing something about it, not just reflecting on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Ingrid?
Yeah, maybe just to add, you need to make the commitment that you are in this for the long run. This is not a 3 months exercise. This is a years, decades exercise to drive this forward, because you need to make sure that you touch the topic on so many different levels and from so many different angles and initiatives. It's complicated. It can be done, but I think it can only be done when you create the right level of accountability in the organization and with your leadership teams. Because if it is not something that is going to drive by itself, you need to invest time and budget into it. You need resources, just like you were also referring to, Heidi. And it's not only an exercise that the CEO can drive forward. If it's not being approached as one team, as one company, then you will not get traction around the topic, and you will see that your efforts are actually falling short. So it is a really strong commitment, and you can only do it if everybody's on board and keeps themselves accountable for it.
Absolutely, thank you. And Sue Yin, from you, anything to add?
Well, I guess just briefly, I said you just have to do it, because DE&I is tied to a company's license to operate for the various reasons that have been highlighted by Mark, Ingrid, and Jan. I think it is going to be a difficult journey. It's not going to be an easy journey, but don't make it just a box ticking exercise. And I think the one advice I can give is have clear objectives. Know why you're doing this and approach this in stages.
Yeah, very sound advice.
That will make it easier to implement and execute, and also incorporate agility along the way.
Yeah. Very, very sound advice. Thank you. Time has today flown by, and I kind of thought it probably would. So we're coming to the end, but to finish up, I would love to hear from each of you that if you were able to give one message to organisations who may not yet have got to the point of prioritising DEI, but are on the brink of it and potentially getting involved in initiatives such as this, what would you say to them? What would your words of encouragement be? What would your message be? Ingrid, could we start with you, please?
Yes, well, of course, I encourage everybody to get on the journey. I think for all the good arguments that have been shared over the past 2 hours, starting with the feedback, the data, but also how do we need to make sure that we change the industry and are ready for the next decades and years to come. I think one element here is reach out to people that are maybe a little bit ahead of you. Try to learn, try to engage, get feedback, get material what you could reutilize, or you can actually make it tailor-made for your organization. This is, of course, there is an element here that you want to diversify because of also a D&I strategy, but there's also a lot of good knowledge sharing that is possible around this. And I think with your initiative also, Heidi, and the DSG, there are very good discussions. There's a lot of knowledge sharing here. So I think that is something, start with the right initiatives that suit your organization well, create the accountability, and then, build on that momentum together with others in the industry.
Thank you very much. Mark?
Yeah, I read somewhere that a culture takes 7 years to be properly implemented. So, you know, if you really want to be talking about the cultures in your company, give it time. And I think within that, you've got to be repetitive, but repetitive gets boring. So you've got to keep it fresh. And, you know, that needs, again, new ideas and new thinking, but at the same time, you need consistency. So, you know, you're trying to balance a number of needs and a number of ideas here with the same sort of end goal. And the end goal isn't perfection. It's improvement and it's about balance. And I think it's important that people just come back to understanding that this is about culture, and culture takes time and patience. So that'd be the best advice I can give.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sue Yin.
I think I would say two things. Firstly, listen and hear from the people whom you are trying to help through your diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Because what you perceive to be a problem may not necessarily be a problem or challenge for underrepresented groups. So really listen and hear from the floor as to what the challenges are and design your program around that. I think secondly, it's don't be afraid of failure. We're tackling a really difficult issue here, one that is ingrained in culture and multiple cultures, not only of ethnic culture, but industry culture, corporate culture. So it is a beast of a problem that we're trying to tackle here. You won't succeed initially. You may not succeed on every step along the way, but don't be afraid of failure. Just learn and keep evolving your program, and you'll get there eventually. And like Ingrid says, lean into the ones who are ahead of you. And let's start collaborating on this issue as an industry moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Jan, final words on this one from you, please.
Oh, I feel the pressure. No, I think the journey piece is very important for me. Some people have been here on a bit earlier. Some people maybe have more resources attached to this, and I think just lean in, tap into that. I think that is absolutely one. But the real advice, and that's been very helpful for myself, I think, is take a couple of steps back as a leader and just think, what am I actually building here? You know, what is the future business models? What is the industry going towards? And try to stay away from the short-term firefighting kind of approach, because I think that is the thing that is holding us back a lot of times. So take a step back, look a bit further out, and challenge yourself on, where am I hiring for? Am I hiring for capabilities? Am I hiring for certain skill sets? What do I need? What do I have? Instead of just falling into the trap of just replacing what you have. And I think just taking that step back and really have a bit more of a future look. I think by definition, if you do that, you will come to the conclusion that DEI is something that you have to embrace and is going to make you get to where you want to go. So that will be my final advice there.
Thank you, and thank you so much. And thank you to all of you. It's been a phenomenal discussion, and the insights and what we're taking away from it, I think for myself, is vast, and I'm sure for everybody who's been in attendance as well. We've really, unfortunately, not got time for any Q&As. We have run very much to the final limits of where we're at. I think in terms of the day-to-day, I want to thank all of you, and also the rest of the presenters that we've had as well. So that's Raphael, Edine, and also Paul and Joanne. Of course, Jenny as well, Jennifer Barrow, who's done a sterling job within the DSG and working with us on the annual review. Thanks also to Peter Carter, who's contributed to it as well. And also to the members, but also, as Jenny said, to all of the employees who've taken the time, because it's a voluntary exercise, but they've taken the time to participate in this. And they've taken the time to really put not only their data forward, but their thoughts and their comments. And we'll be publishing our annual report early next week. And so if anyone is interested in receiving a copy of that, we'll be in touch with all participants from today. And we can certainly share a copy of that with you, where there's some more insights and a bit more detail. For full members, we have a discussion in 2 weeks' time, and I think you all know about that, where we go into an even deeper dive on some of the data and what we can be looking at that, and how we can look at that over the next, the next year. And in terms of anything else, I think just again, thank you so much to everybody. We've looked at the data, we've looked at the transparency, the best practice, what some really pioneering leaders are doing within the sector. And I think it's just keep on, watching, learning and collaborating, because I think we all agree that the collaboration on this is a key part of us going on this journey even quicker and achieving better results than if we all do it working in silo. So thank you very much to everybody, and wish you a lovely day ahead, and look forward to continuing our discussions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.